rave to go to later. It's gonna be a good day. Love Film Fridays. If this is your first time ever listening to anything true crime related, hi, welcome. That makes me a little bit nervous, but no pressure. I really hope you like our very first episode. We're honestly still not sure if this episode is going to be part 1 or 2-parter. Do you think this episode is going to be a 2-parter?
No, it should be 1 part.
I hope not. Like, I really didn't want that for our first episode, but if it happens, oh well. We just have no clue how long it's going to go. We're guessing at least an hour and 10 minutes, maybe more. We'll see. Oh, I might have traumatized Lauren at work. The other day, I was playing the theme song for her. She was actually the first person I ever played the theme song for, and she listened to it, and she just had this horrified look on her face, and I was like, is it good? And she was like, it's scary, and I was like, but is it good? So, I'm sorry, Lauren.
That means we did a good job.
Yeah, I hope so. I hope it's not like, yeah, I'm not listening anymore.
Oh, you search stuff at work?
Oh, yeah, I do. Like for the podcast?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because it's just easier than me taking out my own laptop at work.
That's true.
Just use the work computer.
HR is gonna pull you to the side one day and be like, girl.
No. Hey, so we cannot look up violent crimes on the hospital network. Yeah, but until then, I mean, it's where I've gotten 90% of the episode done, if I'm being honest, is at work. Do you want to talk about school? We're going to school soon.
Oh my god. I don't want to think about school. You know, today marks 3 weeks until I go back.
It's crazy that you're counting, because I'm not.
No, I am. I have to. And
I love that you go back to school before me. That's a mean thing to say.
No, I hate it.
I need you to suffer before I do, so I know what I'm getting into.
Yeah.
But that being said, because we're going back to school, for the podcast, we're just going to try to have that goal of having at least 1 to 2 episodes out a month. For now, we want to stay consistent, but also realistic at the same time. But we are planning something extra spooky for October. Sonia had an idea for a theme month. We're not telling you yet, but I'm actually super excited for it. I think you guys are really going to fuck with the month of October. Oh, if you're having trouble finding us on Apple Podcasts, we're dealing with some tech issues on their end, but we've already contacted them. So if you're not seeing us yet, just try refreshing or something. We should be up. So, sorry, Apple listeners, you almost missed a chance to hear us talk about the Watts family murders. I genuinely think the way this case fell into our laps, it was meant to be episode 1, right, Sonia?
Right. Crazy.
Yeah,
it was random.
Yeah, I know, and we went back and forth on what should be our episode 1 case, but the very first day of our research, we started developing the timeline of this case and the chronological timeline, and we see the date of the murder, and it's August 13th, 2018, and we're like, holy shit, wait, hold on, that's coming up kind of soon. So to honor the victims, we wanted this episode to come out August 13th, 2025. Today is the 7th year anniversary of the Watts family murders. The Watts family was by all accounts the perfect family. I mean, mom and dad, 2 beautiful baby girls, a newborn on the way, a beautiful house and vacations with the grandparents, a thriving business that paid for vacations, and a luxurious lifestyle, all showcased by the victim on her social media accounts.
So how do we go from the picture-perfect family to murdering your wife, your 2 daughters, and your unborn child? And here's the kicker. He blamed it all on his wife. How can you have everything in your life and still it wasn't enough for you? It's not often a marital affair turns into a cold-blooded murder, but oh boy, when it does, it does.
August 13th, 2018. It's a Monday morning in Frederick, Colorado. The air is already warm, the kind of late summer heat that sticks to you before noon. Birds are loud in the trees, sprinklers hiss in the front yards. But by 1:40 p.m., Shanann Watts will be reported missing. Before we rewind to the summer that led to this moment, I want you to hear it in real time. exactly the way her friends, her family, and her neighbors did. August 13th, 2018. At 8:55 a.m., Shanann's best friend, Nicole Atkinson, sends a text. Just need to see if you're okay. At 9:21 a.m., Nicole sends another text. Let me know how your appointment goes. No response. At 11:46 a.m., she sends another text. I'm very worried about you. I'm coming to your house. Now, Nicole isn't just a friend. She's someone who sees Shanann almost daily. Their kids are close in age, they hang out all the time together, they've traded school pickups, family dinners, vacation plans. She knows Shanann's patterns, and this morning, nothing matches. Shanann had flown home just after 2 a.m. from a Thrive business trip to Arizona. Now, when I first heard this case, I thought that it was kind of weird that Nicole was already getting so worried about her friend Shanann. I mean, if you dropped me off at 2 a.m. after a trip, I think my friends would probably assume that I'm asleep or that I'm just not answering my phone or my phone is dead. But remember, Nicole knew Shanann's patterns, and also, it was a Monday. The kids were supposed to go to school. Shanann had an important doctor's appointment that Nicole knew about, so that's why Nicole was so worried. Shanann Catherine Ruskek was born on January 10, 1984 in Passaic, New Jersey. She was born to Frank and Sandy Ruskek, but they later moved to Aberdeen, North Carolina when she was younger. Friends from school remember her as driven, always juggling something like sports or schoolwork, jobs. She had energy that could be warm or razor sharp depending on the moment. Unfortunately, Shanann was diagnosed with lupus in her mid-20s. Lupus is a chronic autoimmune disease that can make everyday tasks exhausting, but Shanann refused to let this define her. She took that diagnosis and built a career with Thrive, a health and wellness direct sales company. She was very proud of this. She was able to buy a house when she was 25, which was such a big goal for her, and she loved documenting her life, not just the big moments, but the small ones too, the kind of everyday snapshots most people forget to capture. That habit would later mean that the world would see her life almost frame by frame. Now, in 2010 was when Shanann first heard from Chris Watts. They met the way a lot of modern couples do, through the internet, more specifically through Facebook. He sent her a friend request. She almost ignored it. In her own words, she was coming out of a very difficult period and wasn't looking for anything serious. Now, Shanann had been formally married, but that marriage did end in divorce, and it really took a lot of her confidence away. But Chris was persistent in a quiet way. They started talking slowly. She tried pushing him away. She tried self-sabotaging. He would drive from his place to see her in person, and he just kept showing up. I mean, Chris was persistent. Shanann would later say that during her illness, Chris was there in the moments when she felt unlovable, when she didn't feel confident in herself, and that meant everything. So, eventually her walls came down and they fell in love and got married in 2012 in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. It wasn't an extravagant wedding. She had never come from money anyway. It was more about family than flash. Chris worked as an oil field operator in Colorado. It was a steady job with long hours. Shanann threw herself into her business and her home life. It was a very suburban dream. Now, 1 year after getting married, their first daughter, Bella Marie, was born in December 2013. Shanann's Facebook was filled with videos of Bella giggling in a high chair, toddling through the house, snuggling with her mom. And then 2 years later, in July 2015, they welcomed Celeste, Cece. And she had a fearless streak, even as a toddler. She was rowdy, she was energetic. From the outside, they were a picture-perfect young family. Weekend trips to the park, family vacations, matching holiday outfits on Facebook, a house in a new subdivision in Frederick, Colorado. They had friends, neighbors, and Shanann's online community through Thrive, who all saw them as a tight-knit, affectionate unit. And that's the version most people knew. The one that made what happened in August 2018 even harder to process. We're going back to August 13, 2018 now. Nicole has sent 3 texts to her best friend Shanann, but hasn't gotten a response to any of them. And remember, Nicole isn't just a friend. She's someone who sees Shanann almost daily. Their kids hang out together. Nicole knew that Shanann had a doctor's appointment. Nicole also knew Shanann hadn't felt well during the trip. She had headaches, swelling, fatigue, and she had offered to drive her to this doctor's appointment. So Shanann agreed. For her to miss it without a word, not possible to Nicole. So she was very concerned when Shanann hadn't been answering. In her third text to Shanann at 11:46 a.m., Nicole says that she's going over to Shanann's house, and that's exactly what she does. So by 12:30 p.m., Nicole is pulling into the Watts driveway. And she sees Shanann's Lexus in the garage. She sees Shanann's favorite sandals, the one she wears almost everywhere, neatly by the door. So Nicole knocks. She rings the bell, and she waits, but there's no answer. And this is strange. I mean, her shoes are right there, her cars are right there. So Nicole keeps knocking on the door. She keeps ringing the doorbell. She tries going around the house, looking through the windows, try to see if there's any sort of movement from Shanann, or maybe the girls, maybe they're running late or something. But she sees nothing. So at 1:40 p.m., Nicole calls 911.
Hi, Stacey. My name's Nicole, and I'm calling because I'm concerned about a friend of mine. I dropped her off at her house at 2 in the morning last night because we were out of town together, and we were on the way back from the airport, and she's having issues, and she's pregnant, and I haven't been able to get a hold of her this morning, and I've gone to her house, and her car's there, and stuff like that, but she won't answer the door, she won't answer phone calls, she won't answer text messages. And I'm just really, really concerned. And she had a doctor's appointment this morning, and she didn't go to it. And I don't.
Officer Scott Coonrad is dispatched for a welfare check at the Watts house. Nicole stands outside, scanning every window of the house like she's hoping to catch some sort of movement inside. Now, it's not like Nicole has a key or anything to the house, and unfortunately, the police officer isn't able to go in without a property owner's permission. So, Nicole calls Shanann's mom, Sandy, to ask for the key code for the garage to see if she can get in that way. But also, she wants to call Shanann's mom, Sandy, to see if she knows anything about where Shanann and the girls are. But when Nicole calls Sandy, Sandy has no idea what Nicole is talking about. She doesn't know anything. She says that Chris told her that Shanann was at a friend's house. And in the documentary, you can hear the police officer kind of ask as Sandy's on speakerphone with Nicole, and he asked if she knows what friend, but Sandy says that Chris didn't say. Well, they might be able to get some answers anyway, because a few minutes later, Chris Watts pulls into the driveway in his white petroleum work truck. His face is hard to read. It's a mix of blank and hurried. He tells Nicole and the officer he's been at a job site all morning. Nicole is still on the phone with Shanann's mom, Sandy. Now, again, the police can't enter without permission from the homeowner. And this is what I like about Sandy is she has this thick country accent, and she's on the phone with Nicole and she's like, I'm giving you permission to go inside. You could break a window if you have to. But regardless, Chris is there, he opens the door, and they all walk in. Inside the Watts home, the house is calm. Almost too calm. There's no broken glass, there's no overturned furniture, there's no signs of forced entry. Nothing's missing except for Shanann and the girls. But on the couch, there's Shanann's phone, powered off. And Chris and Nicole are really worried now because this isn't just her phone. Her phone is her business. It has her schedule, her entire contact list with her clients. Shanann lived with her phone in her hand. She didn't leave it on tables. She wouldn't leave it behind. Chris powers on the phone. So Chris powers on the phone. And to be expected, there are a ton of missed phone calls and missed text messages that come flooding in. The first notification that they see is one from Chris himself at 7:40 a.m. If you take the kids somewhere, please let me know where they are at. Kind of a strange message to send, but... Also inside the house, Nicole finds Shanann's purse sitting on the kitchen counter, and this really worries Nicole because inside she sees Shanann's wallet, her credit cards, her driver's license, and most importantly, Shanann's lupus medication, something that she took daily without fail. And as he's going through the house, Chris says that the girls' blankies are gone, and this just broke my heart when I heard this. I mean, just hearing the word blankies and knowing what happens after. But again, there's no sign of the girls. There's nothing to indicate where they could have gone, where they may be. There's nothing. Chris gestures towards the nightstand. Shanann's wedding ring is lying there, neatly placed. Upstairs, so police try to kind of ask the neighbors that are around, hey, has anyone seen anything strange lately? Has anyone seen Shanann or the girls anywhere? None of the neighbors have seen anything. But thankfully, one neighbor walks over and he invites Officer Coonrad and Chris Watts to check his security camera feed. Now, this neighbor says that he has a camera that records out on his property 24/7. And I mean, this is forensic gold. I mean, video footage, this could be everything. This could tell the police exactly where the girls might have gone. So, Chris and this police officer walk over to this neighbor's house to watch this footage. And as they look at the footage, they see nothing but Chris's car on camera. At 5:27 a.m., Chris's truck appears on the footage. Now, the next day, August 14th, there's still no sign of Shanann or the girls. Chris is giving a TV interview in his driveway, and he's pleading for Shanann and the girls to come home. His arms are folded tight across his chest to go to walk away. As Chris goes to leave, the neighbor kind of pulls the cop behind, and he's like, listen, I need to tell you something. So when Chris walks away, this neighbor, his name is Nate, he quietly pulls the officer aside and he says, he's not acting right. He's usually really quiet. Now, he's talking a mile a minute. And this is when the neighbor pulls the police officer back into his house to... Back inside, Nicole tells the officer Shanann would never leave without her phone, her purse, or her children. She tells the officer, hey, look, I dropped her off at 2 a.m. I'm really worried about her. We were on this business trip. She wasn't acting right. We basically had to force her to eat or drink anything. She was just being really strange, and I'm really worried. And this is the moment that the mood changes. The welfare check becomes a missing persons case. Now back at the Watts house, more police officers have arrived. They're trying to find out whatever they can that can point them in any direction as to where Shanann and the girls might have gone. But they're reaching a bust. She's been missing from between 2 a.m. when her friend Nicole dropped her off to before 9 a.m. when I'm assuming her doctor's appointment was. And I mean, she couldn't have gone to her parents' house in North Carolina because Nicole says her Lexus was still there. Chris couldn't think she could be at anyone's house like a friend, and her mom couldn't think of any friend's house that she could be at. So with no new leads, police leave the Watts house, giving Chris a card with the number to the station, and Chris is like, sweet. But this is the moment that the mood changes, because this welfare check has now become a missing persons case. 3 missing people. Now the next day, August 14, 2018, Chris is in his driveway giving a local TV interview, pleading for Shanann and the girls to come home. His arms are folded tight across his chest, he sways from side to side, he looks at the camera just long enough to speak, and then he glances away. But on this TV interview, Chris Watts tells this reporter that he had an emotional conversation with Nicole the day that she went missing, but unfortunately, he won't elaborate further. Behind the scenes, Officer Goodman calls Chris for, just standard missing persons details for this report he needs to fill out. Height, weight, hair color, what clothes the girls were last seen wearing, that kind of standard information. Which, I'm not really sure why this information wasn't collected the day before. I would figure that's something that might have been mentioned earlier, but I digress. And this is just a side note, but it's just so hilarious when the cop is on the phone with Chris and, he's doing Bella's report, and in the most monotone voice, this cop just goes, does she have any tattoos? Which is hilarious to me because the common 4-year-old doesn't have tattoos, but you just know they have to ask, but like still. And Chris is just like, no, my 4-year-old daughter does not have tattoos. And then the police officer has to ask the same thing for Cece, and she's 3 years old, and Chris is like, no, my 3-year-old daughter does not have any tattoos. And I just thought that was so funny. But anyways, the cops are going door to door in Frederick asking if anyone has seen or heard anything from Shanann, Belle, or Cece. Have they noticed anything strange in the days leading up to the girls going missing? You know, odd vehicles, noises, lights, anything like that around the neighborhood. And while the neighbors aren't recalling anything strange, some neighbors are recognizing Shanann from her Facebook family-style vlogs. Now, there's one neighbor who says that she did see something strange. In fact, that's why she thought the cops were originally knocking on her door. This neighbor says that the other day she saw a truck, almost a steel gray, but she didn't know the make or the year. And she said it herself, do not even ask her because she cannot guess. Now, I'm not sure why exactly this vehicle was strange to this neighbor, but I'm just going to go based off the assumption that, you know, in a neighborhood, when you see the same people all the time, you know their cars, so if you see a different one day, it might stick out to you.
But with no description, it led to nothing.
The next day, August 15, 2018, Nicole Atkinson, the friend of Shanann, goes into the police station to speak with Agent Greg Zegner to give them any more information that she can. So Nicole starts telling police officers about when Shanann's behavior first started changing. You know, she started being weird, distraught, on edge. And this begins in June, just 2 months before Shanann and the girls are reported missing. On June 27, Shanann, Bella, and Cece fly to North Carolina for a 6-week visit to see Shanann's family. Chris has to stay behind for work, and this is when what I like to call the big allergy incident happens. There are some slightly different accounts as to what happened on this big allergy incident day, but this is the version that I think I've heard the most, so I'm gonna go with this one. So Cece's birthday is coming up on this trip. Chris's mom, Cindy, offers Cece an ice cream, which seems innocent enough. Now the issue is Cece has a huge tree nut allergy, and tree nut allergies are serious. I mean, so Cece is allergic to almonds, cashews, walnuts, hazelnuts, pecans. Did I say pistachios already? Macadamia nuts, Brazil nuts, pine nuts. I mean, this is a serious allergy, and tree nuts are found in so many things, especially baked goods, cakes, cookies, and ice cream. So of course, Shanann kind of freaks out and she's like, hey, don't give my daughter an ice cream. She has an allergy. We don't know if this has touched anything. We don't know if this has anything in it that could cause a reaction. But as Shanann is confronting Cindy, it turns into a big disagreement that just blows up, and Chris's parents skip Cece's birthday party entirely. Shanann is obviously very upset by this. She texts Chris and she asks him to speak to his parents and let them know that they're both very upset that they will not be going to their daughter's birthday party. And Chris does. Finally, on July 31st, Chris joins his family in North Carolina to eventually fly back with them. And after 5 weeks apart, Shanann expects some closeness from her husband. I mean, wouldn't we all? But on this trip, they're not being physically intimate at all. I mean, he's not touching her, kissing her, nothing. And Shanann's getting upset because they've been separated for 5 weeks. So Shanann texts her friend and she's starting to wonder if there's someone else. And she confronts Chris about it, but he says that there's no one else, and she's being ridiculous. About a week later, on August 7th, the family flies back to Colorado. In the week that Chris had joined his family, he and Shanann did not have sex, not even once, and she was upset by this. He was still not touching her, not hugging her, kissing her, nothing. So when they get back home on August 7th, Shanann and Chris are not doing okay, but Chris tells Shanann he wants to fix it. She tries being intimate with him sexually, but that doesn't end up happening that night. Shanann is angry. She wakes Chris up in the middle of the night, demanding to know if there's someone else. I mean, why else wouldn't he want to touch her? Why else wouldn't he want to kiss his own wife? But again, Chris denies cheating. Shanann is really distraught because she has a trip coming up soon and now she doesn't even want to go, but Chris is telling her it's okay, they're fine, they'll work on things when they get back, and that she should go on her trip. So Shanann agrees to go. And on August 10th, 3 days later, Shanann leaves for Arizona. And right before Shanann leaves, she tells Chris that she found out the gender of their baby, and it's a boy. And then she leaves for Arizona. Now on this trip, Shanann is, texting Chris, how are the girls? How's everything at home? Chris says everything is good. They text back and forth and things seem okay. But then later that day, Shanann gets a notification from her bank. It's a credit card charge. So she opens up her phone and she looks at the notification and she sees a charge for $62 at the Lazy Dog. Shanann is really confused by this because obviously she didn't make that purchase. So she calls Chris and she says, hey, do you know anything about this charge on this card? And Chris is like, yeah, that was me. I went out with some friends earlier to the Lazy Dog. The Lazy Dog, by the way, is just this restaurant, bar, grill kind of place. And Chris says that he went there earlier with some friends and he got a salmon and a beer. But Shanann isn't convinced by this story. So she looks up the menu for the Lazy Dog Cafe and she sees that a beer and a salmon was not $62. Chris had lied. So now Shanann is in full-blown mode thinking that there's someone else. He's cheating and there's someone else. The next day, August 12th, is her last day in Arizona. And she and Chris are barely communicating. They haven't spoken or texted all day. Shanann is pissed because Chris is spending all day working out. They get into an argument about his family. Shanann feels he's not sticking up for his family enough. And they just keep on arguing all day. Now Shanann is supposed to come home that night from her 3-day business trip to Arizona. But Chris doesn't pick her up from the airport, saying that he fell asleep on the couch. And this was why Nicole Atkinson, Shanann's friend, dropped off Shanann at around 2 in the morning on August 13th, 2018. And this was why I'm assuming Nicole had offered to give Shanann a ride to her doctor's appointment in the morning. And Nicole tells all of this to police on August 15th when she gives her interview. She tells police that Shanann thought that because of this big allergy argument in North Carolina, that's why she and Chris weren't on good terms, because there was this rift that was kind of going on between Chris and his family because he's kind of stuck between, sticking up for his wife and sticking it to his parents. So Shanann had thought that that's why it was because of this argument and this tension that she was having with his parents. And Shanann had told Nicole that there was only one other time that Chris would act this way towards her, very cold and indifferent. And this had happened right after they got married in 2010. And Shanann thought that it was because Chris's parents didn't like Shanann. She had taken him away from, she's a dominant personality in the relationship. That's why Shanann thought Chris's parents didn't like her. And Nicole recounts all of this to police in her interview on August 15th.
Police interview Luke Eppel, who's Chris's supervisor, asking if he knows where the
girls might have gone, if they've heard anything. And Luke doesn't know anything. He finds of concerns from Chris, and in fact, that's actually what Luke comments on, is Chris's mood. Now, Luke Eppel had known Chris for years. They'd worked side by side at Anadarko Petroleum, which is the company that they worked for. They'd spend long hours out on remote oil sites. It's the kind of job where you get to know someone's habits, rhythms, moods. And so Luke told investigators in his interview that when news had spread around the job site that Chris's wife and kids were missing, Luke's gut reaction wasn't shock. It was recognition. And so when Luke says to police, when this kind of thing happens, there's usually a woman involved, that makes police think. Investigators ask Chris if he's willing to submit to a polygraph. Chris agrees. Now, as a side note, it's a pretty known thing in the forensics world that polygraphs are not reliable. They are not 100% foolproof. You can Google ways to fool a polygraph. So just remember, whenever you're hearing things about a polygraph, just take it with a grain of salt. But anyway, Chris agrees to the polygraph. Before they begin, the examiner warns him, if you have anything to do with this, now is your chance to tell the truth. But Chris is still agreeing to the polygraph. Right before they start, the examiner says to Chris, right now, only one person knows the truth, but in just a few minutes, both of us will. Now, there were 4 main questions that investigators asked Chris on the polygraph. 1. Do you know where Shanann is now? Chris answered no. 2. Do you know where Bella or Celeste are now? Chris answered no. 3. Did you physically cause Shanann's disappearance? Chris answered no. And 4, are you lying about the last time you saw Shanann? Chris answered no. Now they compared Chris's answers to 2 questions that they had asked him early, that were standard questions to set a baseline. Are you currently sitting down? Is today Wednesday? Full answers so that they can compare them when they do ask you questions about the case. So that's what investigators were doing with Chris's answers. And after reviewing the results, investigator Tammy Lee says to Chris, there's no way you did not lie to me on this test. Chris had failed the polygraph. And this is when Chris tells a new story to police. Chris tells investigators that he did cheat on Shanann. In fact, he was having a full-blown affair and he had wanted to separate from Shanann. He just didn't know when he was going to do it or how he was going to do it. But in any case, investigators didn't think that this mystery woman had anything to do with Shanann and the girl's disappearance. So they put her on the back burner. At this point, Chris's body language has completely changed. His shoulders are hunched, his eyes are darting between the 2 agents. He's still denying that he knows anything about where Shanann or the girls are.
But Special Agent Graham Coder is not fucking around, and he says to Chris, look, you got a new girlfriend, you didn't want your old life anymore, and you saw one way to get rid of it. Now is your last chance to come clean.
Chris swallows hard and asks for his dad. Ronnie Watts had flown in from North Carolina that morning, and so he walks into this small interview room to see his son. The agents leave the 2 of them alone. Chris is sitting across from his dad, Ronnie Watts, and he tells them that he failed the polygraph and that they know about the affair. And Ronnie turns to his son and he asks, did Shanann hurt the kids? Whoa. At this point, you're probably wondering the exact same thing that I was wondering, which is like, why the fuck did Ronnie just ask that? Like, did Shanann hurt the kids? I mean, that just came way out of left field. But here's the breakdown of why. Investigators had already planted that possibility in Chris's mind, and it was a very intentional tactic. It's an interrogation strategy. Before Ronnie came in, Detective Coder and CSI agent Tammy Lee suggested to Chris, that maybe Shanann had done something to the girls in a moment of desperation or anger. This is called a minimization technique used by detectives. It's giving the suspect an out or a lesser evil scenario that might make it easier for them to confess the truth. Because at this point, Chris is still denying any sort of responsibility when it comes to Shanann and the girls, but his facade is cracking. So the investigators kind of dangled the scenario like, what if Shanann did something and you reacted, to kind of make him feel, I guess, safer to tell some version of the truth. But anyhow, so when Chris asked to see his dad, the detectives had briefed Ronnie in the hallway before he went in to see his son, and they told him that Chris was holding something back, and they hinted that they believe Shanann may have harmed the girls. So this was likely to kind of prepare Ronnie to reinforce that scenario when speaking to his son. So Ronnie wasn't just guessing blindly like we, or like I guess I had originally thought when he asked Chris, did Shanann hurt the kids? He was echoing a narrative that detectives had already just seeded, trying to open the door for Chris to admit to something. So Ronnie had just asked Chris, did Shanann hurt the kids? And Chris turns to his dad and says, yes, and I had to kill her. But then really quickly he says, I hurt her, I have to tell them that I hurt her. Whoa, I mean, kind of a big difference between the words kill and hurt, in my opinion at least. And so he's saying, they're gone, there's no bringing them back. And investigators are like, well, where are they? And so Chris tells a new story to the detectives. And in this story, according to Chris tells the detective that Shanann had killed the girls, and he strangled her in a rage. He says that he drove all 3 bodies to Survey 319, which is an oil site that he had been working at that day. He didn't know what to do. He was so scared. Chris is asking what's going to happen to them. He just wants to find the babies and get them out of there, give them a proper burial. Chris's dad asks if the girls are wrapped in anything. Chris says only Shanann is. Chris is obviously at this point arrested by police. He says that, and he buried Shanann in a shallow grave and placed the girls in separate oil tanks. He said the girls are in an oil tank. These oil tanks are 20 feet deep, And so investigators go back into the interrogation room and they bring in drone footage to show Chris drone footage of the work site so that he can pinpoint to detectives where the bodies are so that they can find these girls. On this drone footage that they're showing to Chris in this interrogation room, the investigators see what appears to be kind of like a white sheet, and it's just kind of next to like this pile of dirt randomly on this site. So they focus in on that. And that night, investigators begin to follow up on multiple leads, including contacting the woman that Chris was having an affair with, Nicole Kessinger. Just a little side note, don't get confused with the Nicole from the beginning of the case who is Shanann's best friend. There are now two different Nicoles in this story. On the morning of August 16, 2018, just 3 days after Shanann and the girls were reported missing, Nicole Kessinger comes into the police station and sits in for her first formal interview with law enforcement. And she has a lot to say. When Nicole Kessinger sits down, she's composed, but there's tension in her voice. She tells investigators that Chris told her he was in the final stages of a divorce, that he and Shanann were working out the details and living separate lives under the same roof. She claims she had no idea that Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant at the time. Nicole tells investigators that she began to grow suspicious of Chris when his story started changing. He said the house was going up for sale, but there was no real estate listing. He said they were almost separated, but Shanann had just returned from a family trip with the kids. And guys, maybe it's just me, but as much as Nicole Kessinger in her interviews works hard to put distance between herself and like being involved in this affair, the timing is just so hard to ignore because the relationship was heating up just as Shanann's world was collapsing. Chris had met Nicole Kessinger at work in June 2018, just 1 month before Shanann and the girls would leave for their 6-week vacation to North Carolina to see Shanann's family. They had crossed paths in mid-June 2018. Kessinger had worked in the environmental department at Anadarko Petroleum, the same company where Chris was a field operator, and within weeks, they were in a full-blown affair, meaning that when Shanann had been asking her friends, wondering, if there's someone else, when she had confronted Chris and asked him if he was cheating on her, she was right. There was another woman. But this wasn't just an affair. This was a full-blown relationship with him and his coworker. I mean, they went on dates. This wasn't just a work crush. They were spending nights together. They were going to restaurants. They were planning trips. She was Googling wedding dresses. And all within the same month in June, Shanann had announced that she was pregnant to Chris and that they were going to have a boy together. But then Shanann and the girls left to North Carolina for 6 weeks, just 2 weeks after that, because Chris had to stay behind for work. So while Shanann is freaking out, texting him saying, I miss you, like, why aren't you texting me, why aren't you calling me back? Chris is living the dream life with his brand new girlfriend from work. When detectives asked Kessinger about that day, August 13th, the day that Shanann and the girls were reported missing, Nicole Kessinger says that Chris had texted her that morning like it was any other work day. She didn't see the news coverage until later when the missing persons alert went public.
And she said she just had to come in.
Later that same day, after Kessinger gives her interview to police and acting on Chris's statements, police and recovery teams searched the Survey 319 oil site. On the work site, investigators come across what looks to be like a disturbed patch of earth, and it catches their eye. The ground looks sunken in, it's slightly darker than the surrounding dirt, and a few weeds are bent unnaturally. It's Shanann's grave. It's shallow, it's no more than 1 to 2 feet deep. She's wrapped in a white sheet that investigators match back to her and Chris's bed from their house. There's drag marks that stretch from the tire ruts of Chris's truck to the edge of the grave. And then, the tanks. 2 massive 400-barrel crude oil containers, each with an 8-inch diameter hatch at the top, barely wide enough for a child's body. Chris said the girls were inside. The recovery is slow. Crews have to put on SCBA gear, which stands for self-contained breathing apparatus. They needed it because the environment that the girls were found in the oil tanks was so dangerous for them to breathe in.
and they worked to carefully drain all of the oil out of the oil tanks, working methodically to preserve the evidence. When they reach the girls, the oil's effect is clear. It's preservation mixed with irreversible damage. Bella is found face down. Celeste is in another tank. Each had been placed separately. This was more than disposal. This was calculated separation, as if even in death, Chris wanted them divided. By late afternoon, all 3 bodies are transported to the Weld County Coroner's office. The news hits Frederick, Colorado like a physical blow. Vigils are organized within hours. Neighbors leave flowers, teddy bears, and handwritten notes outside the Watts home. But at the same time that the community of Frederick is mourning the loss of 3 precious souls, the media backlash is insane. In the hours after Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were recovered, something ugly happened. Instead of national sympathy, a portion of the media and an even louder faction of the public online turned on Shanann. The victim blaming was instant. Cable news anchors replayed her Facebook family-style vlogs, but they would put captions under the clips like, "Did Shanann Watts control her husband too much?" On talk shows and Facebook threads, strangers dissected her marriage like they'd lived in her house. They said things like, "She was too bossy. She emasculated him. Maybe she drove him to it." Clips were played out of context to make her look controlling. Entire YouTube channels accused her of lying about her lupus diagnosis and accused her of being physically abusive to Chris. Dr. Michael Burson performs the autopsies on Shanann Watts, Celeste, and Bella Watts on August 17, 2018, one day after the recovery of the bodies. Shanann Watts' cause of death was listed as strangulation. They found bruising to her neck muscles, petechia in her eyes, which, if you don't know, petechia is what happens when the blood vessels in your eyes burst, which would be consistent with the strangulation of Shanann Watts because there was such limited oxygen going to her brain. Shanann also had a fractured hyoid bone, which is again consistent with strangulation. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with a male fetus, later named Nico Lee Watts. The cause of death for Nico was listed as due to maternal death. The cause of death for Celeste Watts was listed as smothering. No blunt force trauma, no defensive wounds were found in her body. She was likely smothered with a soft object like a blanket. Now for Bella Watts' autopsy, her cause of death was also listed as smothering, the same as Cece. But unlike her sister Cece, on Bella Watts they found bruising to the frenulum, which is kind of like that skin on top of your upper lip, which Dr. Burson did agree that this was likely consistent with signs of a struggle. And that's just one of the most haunting details I think about this case, is just knowing that that little girl, that 4-year-old, fought back for her life. But it's strange because Bella is the only one of the 3 girls who appeared, at least on the autopsy, to have put up a fight. And also, unlike her little sister Cece, on Bella's body they found scrapes and bruising along her arms and legs, likely from having to be shoved through that 8-inch hatch because she was slightly bigger than her sister. So it would have taken more effort to get her in there, and that's likely why she was found face down as well, because Chris would have had to manipulate her body. The coroner wasn't able to establish precise times of death due to the conditions of the bodies, especially for Bella and Cece, who had been submerged for 4 days. Separately, in different oil tanks, they found oil in the girls' throats, in their noses, in their mouths. 5 days after the bodies were recovered, Chris is formally arraigned. His charges include 5 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts for each child under 12, plus 1 for Shanann, 3 counts of tampering with a deceased body, and 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy. The courtroom is silent. On November 6, 2018, Chris pleads guilty to all 9 counts in exchange for prosecutors removing the death penalty from consideration, a decision made with input from Shanann's family. Her mother, Sandy, says that they wanted to avoid further pain for their grandchildren, who would someday learn the truth. On November 19th, Chris stands motionless as Judge Marcelo Kopkow sentences him to 3 consecutive life sentences without parole.
2 additional life sentences for the murders of Bella and Celeste, 48 years for unlawful termination of pregnancy, and 36 years for each count of tampering with a body. Before sentencing, Shanann's brother, Frankie Ruskek, addresses Chris directly, and he says to him, "You were her hero. How could you take that away?" Sandy Ruskek's statement honors Shanann's boundless energy, her devotion to her daughters, and the way in which Shanann was able to build an entire supportive community on Facebook through her business Thrive, where Shanann had shared her family life and spoke about her health journey as she continued to battle lupus. Cindy Watts, Chris's mother, tells her son, "We love you, we forgive you." The words hang heavy in the courtroom. Judge Kapkow, who had given Chris his sentence, says that this was the most vicious crime he's handled out of thousands, and that anything less than the maximum sentence would be a dishonor to Shanann, Bella, and Cece. Chris Watts is given 3 life sentences. Funeral services are held in North Carolina, and hundreds attend. Shanann's parents speak about her love for her children and her strength in living with lupus. And in the week following the murder, Shanann is still being relentlessly attacked in the media. I mean, there are still active Reddit threads that me and Sonia were looking up that were brutally attacking Shanann and her parenting style, with a really concerning amount of people agreeing that they didn't blame Chris for reacting the way that he did. In the weeks that follow, the Watts home becomes a place of uneasy pilgrimage. Tourists and true crime followers drive by to see the now empty house, its blinds drawn. It's eventually sold to a private buyer after years of foreclosure limbo. Nicole Kessinger, the woman who Chris was having an affair with, disappears from public view, reportedly entering witness protection under a new identity. Which is like, I'm sorry, but fuck you. You knew he was married, dude. Fuck you. The case has become the subject of numerous documentaries, podcasts, and endless online debate. In Frederick, though, the focus is on remembrance. A memorial bench is placed at the girls' school. Each August, purple balloons are released into the sky. Later on, in February 2019, which is the next year after the murders, Christopher Watts is in jail serving out his life sentence. Reporters and numerous other people will try to visit him in jail to get his account of the story all over again. And in February 2019, Christopher Watts agrees to tell one more story. And this is a story that changes everything. On August 13th, 2018, after Shanann had come back from her business trip to Arizona, she did confront Chris about having an affair. And they got into a huge argument, and Shanann told him that he would never see the kids again, that she was leaving him and taking them with her. And he told her that he didn't love her anymore. She pushed him, and he strangled her. And Bella, who was holding her pink blankie, walked into the room asking what was wrong with Mommy. Chris takes Bella and Cece and he puts them into their truck, and he grabs the body of Shanann Watts and he puts her onto the floor of his truck, and he drives 45 minutes to Suburbia 319, his work site. The girls sat in the truck with their mother's body. At the site, Chris smothered Cece with a blanket. Bella's last words were, "Daddy, no." Unfortunately, that's all we've been able to get out of Chris Watts since then, and he's a lying sack of shit, so take everything he says with a grain of salt. It makes you think, was Christopher Watts, was he jealous of this new baby that was coming? Was he jealous of his wife's success? Was he triggered by their expenses, by their financial situation? His wife made more money than him. I mean, was it emasculation?
Okay, so Sonia here. So right now we're going to deep dive into the psychological aspects of the Watts murder. Okay, so another important aspect to think about is the topic of pregnancy. So a lot of times when pregnancy occurs, there's a lot of changes going on. We can talk about the changes in the woman, bodily functions and things like that, but also there's finances that change, emotional aspects that change. For people, for narcissistic partners who crave this control, this can be threatening. They may see the baby as competition for attention, affection, or any type of resources, and they react with resentment or hostility. And in some cases, they didn't even want the baby. The pregnancy becomes a flashpoint for violence, and Watts reportedly told his girlfriend at the time that the baby was unplanned and unwanted. He might have told his girlfriend this, even though it wasn't true, for the following things. He could feel trapped. There's an overwhelming emotion with the pressures of financial parenthood. He wants to escape. There's poor emotional control. He's stressing, he's angry, and he doesn't know how to cope with it, so he bottles them up. And he bottled them up until the violence erupts. The reason why is because he wanted to escape, and he saw murder as the only option to start over without dealing with divorce. Another point is that Shanann got pregnant when he was seeing the new girlfriend, the new woman, and that's when he started fantasizing about a new life with her. Instead of confronting his wife, he took the path of annihilation, a tactic seen in men who do the following. They want to erase their past. They cannot emotionally cope with failure or confrontation, and they see their family not as loved ones, but as obstacles to freedom. And he reportedly told Nicole that he felt stuck in that relationship. So there's some stats online according to the CDC and other studies. So pregnant women are more likely to experience fatal intimate partner violence than their non-pregnant peers. Homicide is one of the leading causes of maternal death in the United States, and in over 60% of these cases, the perpetrator is the woman's current or former intimate partner. And going back into the Watts, specifically Chris Watts, according to every source online, he has no psychological diagnosis, no official one is known. But there are some trained professionals who have said that he might have malignant or narcissistic personality disorder. This can be seen in individuals with entitlement, manipulation, emotional dissociation, prioritizing admiration and control, and discarding others when no longer useful, aka killing his wife and kids. And there's another one, psychopathic tendencies or antisocial personality disorder. Some of the characteristics for individuals that are diagnosed with this is they have some superficial charm, they lack empathy or remorse, they lie easily, they have emotional detachment. In cases of murder of individuals who are diagnosed with this, their murder was a calculated behavior before and after. Some argued that he did not fit the criteria for a psychopathy, but instead an emotionally inadequate man, according to forensic psychologist Carrie Danes. Some more expert theories or evaluations. So this is from Candice DeLong. She's a former FBI profile. So she labeled Watts as a malignant narcissist and psychopath, citing his lack of empathy or remorse. There's Dr. Jensen James. He referred to Watts as having traits of narcissism, emotional dissociation, and cowardice.
I love that whenever these like criminals are getting profiled, they're just getting like the fucking read on themselves. Like they're like, you're a coward, you're a narcissist. It's so funny.
Yeah. And then there's Dr. Todd Grande, a mental health professional who reviews high-profile cases. He speculated Watts represented a complex mix of narcissism, psychopathy, rage, fantasy-driven infidelity, and low stress response, which we can commonly see in traits that are in family annihilators. And to give some background, you know, with a lot of these cases, there were reports of they were troubled in school, they had a previous criminal record, disciplinary action, so on and so forth. But with Watts, none was reported before the crime, and the only thing that we can see is the crime itself and after the crime. So, to take a look in the future after the crime, one of the most disturbing aspects of the case was after the murders happened. So he appeared on the news pleading for his family's return, and he went along with police investigation and even tried to frame his wife Shanann for the death of their children. So this level of manipulation and emotional detachment points to a person who was able to understand the crime. He was essentially separating it from his own emotional reality. This kind of behavior is often seen in individuals with high-level psychopathy or antisocial tendencies. So my take is that this is crazy, obviously, and it's a reminder that danger doesn't always come from the places you expect, like outside strangers. Sometimes it's in the home, and it's in people that you think you know so well. Chris seemed like a quiet, devoted husband and father, but underneath the surface of the calm exterior and the nonchalantness, he was someone that was emotionally detached, he was not happy, and he was secretly living a double life. He fits the profile of a family annihilator perfectly. He's someone who sees no way out of his current life except through total destruction, aka murdering his family. He wasn't acting out of sudden rage, but he was rather trying to escape the responsibilities he no longer wanted, especially after she became pregnant again. So yeah, we can see how all of this unfolds. There was a lack of communication, bottling up emotions. Being a narcissism and having psychopathic traits can all lead to this. It just goes to show that someone you married 20 years before could be a different person than they are now. So ladies out there, you gotta see your man right. You gotta, make sure he doesn't have any criminal history. Terrifying. But you gotta interview them. You gotta see, how they are when times get tough. And you gotta see, because Shanann did a lot of she was the money maker, she was the decision maker, she did a lot. So you gotta make sure that the man is okay with this.
He's secure enough if you do make more money, then God forbid.
Right, you might, God forbid it leads to something like this. But yeah, crazy.
Oof, y'all.
What the fuck? The fascination with this case is because no one can understand how you can just have everything and it just still wasn't enough. And how the fuck do you just kill your kids? I don't get it. But also, this affair was 6 weeks long. I mean, Christopher Watts had it all. He had a wife, 2 kids, job, beautiful house, vacations with the family. Sure, the Watts family wasn't perfect. One thing that I think wasn't touched enough on this case is the relationship between Chris's family and Shanann. There was clearly a lot of tension there. It makes us kind of wonder, if Chris had said something to his parents before about, the affair, or, how he was feeling about, Shanann and, wanting to separate and all that. It makes me think if maybe he spoke to them beforehand. But obviously, his family not having a good relationship with Shanann, they're not going to tell her anything. But yeah, there was just a bad relationship when it comes to that. And I do think that there's things that maybe Chris shared with his family before the murders, or, like I said, maybe he admitted to the affair and his parents knew about it. I think when Christopher Watts was arrested and he blamed the murders on Shanann, his family was really quick to jump on that boat, and they still supported him. And then even when the truth was revealed, and they still supported him, and they still kind of put the blame on Shanann and her dominating personality. And that's what we saw in the media after this case, which is just it's just so sad when the attention is taken away from what's really important. I mean, at the end of the day, a woman was killed, 2 little girls were killed, and regardless of whether you think, Shanann was dominating and she demasculate, regardless of if that's how you feel about the case, which obviously me and Sonia disagree, as you've heard, but remember, Bella was supposed to start kindergarten that following Monday. Celeste, Cece, she was only 3 years old, had their whole lives ahead of them. I think it's sad. I think that's where the focus should stay on this case, not on the financial situations and and Shanann's Facebook and this and that. I just don't think that stuff is really what's important.
This is an audio recording of Bella Watts singing "My Daddy is a Hero," and Shanann Watts recorded the video and she uploaded it to her Facebook account.
My daddy is a hero. He helps me grow up strong. He helped me not go to. He reads me books. He ties my shoes. If you're a hero, blue and blue, my daddy is love you.
Oh, I love.
And that was the Watts family murders.
Yes.